So instead, I'm really just focusing on two sets of particular operators, and that's plus plus and minus minus, which allows us to add or subtract one from an existing variable. However, when you're performing plus plus and minus minus with a variable reassignment, there's a trick depending on if you put these symbols before or after your variable. Let's slowly introduce this concept to you because you're going to see this a lot when we work with loops later on. Let's head over to Dartpad. Here I am at Dartpad. To begin with, I'm going to create two variables. One is called alpha, which is 0, and one is called beta, which is also going to be 0. Now let's imagine I wanted to add 1 to the value of alpha and then reassign it. What I could do is say alpha is equal to the current value of alpha, which is 0, plus 1. Then I can say run this operation and then reassign it to alpha, which means if I say print alpha and run this, you should see that alpha is equal to 1. And before that operation, if I were to say print alpha, it'd be equal to 0. So hopefully nothing too crazy so far, it's just 0 and 1. Next, what I want to show you is another command, which is the plus plus command. Let's imagine I said plus plus alpha. It looks a little weird, but this is actually an okay arithmetic operation. And essentially what it's saying is add 1 to the value of alpha. Now there's going to be kind of an interesting facet to this, but let's first run this and see if it actually works. So I say plus plus alpha, and I get back the same result. It looks like this did, in fact, add 1 to alpha. Now what happens if I say alpha plus plus? Notice this is now coming after the variable. If I run this, do I expect to see the same result? Well, in this case, when I'm not doing a reassignment of this variable, it is the same result. So keep in mind that plus plus can work before or after this variable to add 1 to it. Here's where it gets slightly complicated. It depends upon a reassignment. Let's say I want beta to be equal to alpha plus 1. That's totally okay, and I can print out beta, and it's going to work just like you expect. I say print beta, I run this, and what value do you expect to see? Well, you would expect to see 1, because beta was 0, and 0 plus 1 is 1. What if I were to do plus plus alpha? Well, when you run this, something interesting is going to happen. Let me go ahead and run that. You get back a 1, which kind of makes sense. So you may think, oh, well, in that case, I'll just also do it afterwards. And then when you run this, you get back 0. So all of a sudden, it does actually matter where the plus plus goes. Let me show that to you one more time. If I say plus plus alpha and run this, that means that this increment is happening before any reassignment. One easy way to see this is if you see plus plus before the variable, then increment of plus 1 happens before assignment. That's why you see beta is equal to 1 here. So plus plus came before the variable, which means I perform plus plus before I actually do anything with that equal sign and reassignment. If I do the same thing, but I do it afterwards, so let's do now let's have plus plus come after the variable, then the increment of plus 1 happens after the assignment, which means if I say beta is equal to alpha plus plus, essentially I'm saying do this assignment first and then add 1 to alpha. So when you run this, you see beta ends up still equaling 0. And let's see what happens if I actually take a look at alpha after this. You will notice alpha did get that plus 1, but it happened after the assignment to beta. So let me, again, kind of reiterate here. If you see the two pluses before the variable, that means that increment of plus 1 happens before the assignment. So alpha is going to be equal to 1, and then you'll go ahead and assign beta equal to 1. If it occurs after, then you're first going to do the assignment and you'll do the increment after the assignment. So that means beta stays as 0 because alpha was 0, and then you add 1 to alpha, which means beta stays as 0, and then alpha actually becomes 1. So keep that in mind, and if you want, really take the time to test yourself on this. Go ahead and kind of write a couple variables with pluses in different areas, and then see if it makes sense the way it should make sense. I should also mention it's the exact same thing, but with minuses as well, so you can subtract as well. So let's try this. Let's do a minus minus and check these results. Go ahead and run that, and you get back 1 and 0. So I changed these to start with 1s. Let's see if that actually makes sense. So remember, they both start off as 1. I have alpha minus minus. It's coming after the variable, which means the increment or decrease of -1 in this case happens after the assignment, which means I say beta, you're going to be equal to alpha, and then I'm going to subtract 1 from alpha, which is why beta is equal to 1, and alpha then gets that subtraction after the assignment of beta. So that's why I see 1 and 0. And in reverse, I could do something like this, and then that says do the decrease first and then do the reassignment. So in this case, you should see them, in just a second here, both be 0, because I am subtracting 1 from alpha and then assigning that 0 value to beta, so now beta and alpha are both 0. So that's minus minus and plus plus. You will see this a lot more when we talk about loops, but I just wanted to introduce that concept now. Definitely, this is something you should play around with. There's not a real good exercise for this unless you just kind of say, okay, I'm going to put a minus minus and plus plus in different locations, and then see if the result is what I expect. That's it for this lecture. We'll see you at the next one.